I'm Jen Moore, Music of the Baroque's program annotator, and welcome to Baroque Notes, our virtual series of pre-concert talks. And welcome also to our 54th season, which we're calling From the Beginning. In this case, it's literally the beginning of the season. Another less pedestrian reason for the theme comes from the work that opens the season, Joseph Haydn's Creation, which was first performed in 1798. Now, many of you know that Haydn is not a Baroque composer. The Baroque era is a period of time between 1600, around when opera began, and 1750, the year Johann Sebastian Bach died. For the record, George Friedrich Handel, who composed the famous oratorio Messiah, died in 1759. The classical era, the time of Mozart and Haydn, starts around 1750 and is generally thought to be over around 1820, when Beethoven truly started to break the rules he had learned from his teacher Haydn. When Music of the Baroque performs music that isn't Baroque, people sometimes ask why. Haydn's Creation is one of the many great answers. To understand what makes this piece so special, it helps to know what came before it. And for Haydn, what came before the creation was the Baroque composer George Friedrich Handel. In 1791, Haydn traveled to London for the first time. From May 23rd to June 1st, he attended the Handel Festival in Westminster Abbey, where he heard Israel in Egypt and Messiah and parts of Esther, Saul, Judas Maccabeus, and Deborah. Can you imagine that? Haydn already knew about Handel's music, but these concerts were special. His friend Giuseppe Carpani recounted, when Haydn heard the music of Handel in London, he was struck as if he had been put back to the beginning of his studies and had known nothing up to that moment. He meditated on every note and drew from those most learned scores the essence of true musical grandeur. Haydn's reaction was slightly more self-centered. There he was, attending a festival entirely dedicated to the work of a single composer, and as he admitted, this stoked his desire to write a work that will give permanent fame to my name in the world. During Haydn's second visit to London in 1794 and then extending into 1795, his friend J.P. Solomon gave him an anonymous libretto in English entitled The Creation of the World. Compiled from sources that included the first two books of Genesis and Milton's Paradise Lost, the text had reportedly been written for Handel. Haydn was intrigued, but as his biographer Dias explained, Haydn had doubts about his knowledge of the English language, did not undertake it, and finally left London on August 15, 1795. When he got back to Vienna, however, he shared the libretto with Baron Gottfried von Swieten, an important patron of music. In a letter to the periodical Allgemeine Musikalische Zeitung, published after the first performance of the creation, von Swieten described what happened after Haydn saw the text. At first sight, the material seemed to him indeed well chosen and well suited to musical effects, but he nevertheless did not accept the proposal immediately. He was just on the point of leaving Vienna, and he reserved the right to announce his decision from there, where he wanted to take a closer look at the poem. On his return, he then showed it to me, and I found myself in agreement with the verdict he had given. But I recognized at once that such an exalted subject would give Haydn the opportunity I had long desired to show the whole compass of his profound accomplishments and to express the full power of his inexhaustible genius. I therefore encouraged him to take the work in hand, and in order that our fatherland might be the first to enjoy it, I resolved to clothe the English poem in German garb. In this way, my translation came about. It is true that I followed the plan of the original faithfully as a whole, but I diverged from it in details as often as musical progress and expression, of which I already had an ideal conception in my mind, seemed to demand. Guided by these sentiments, I often judged it necessary that much should be shortened or even omitted on the one hand, and on the other, that much should be made more prominent or brought in greater relief, and much placed more in the shade. Van Swieten worked on the libretto in both English and German, and in 1796, Haydn began setting the German version of the creation, known as Die Schöpfung. Haydn probably kept the English in mind as he wrote the music for the German words. Even in its earliest stages, the piece profoundly affected the composer. I was never so devout as when I was at work on the creation, the composer recalled. I fell on my knees each day and begged God to give me the strength to accomplish the work successfully. Under Haydn's direction, Die Schöpfung's first performance occurred at the Schwarzenberg Palais on April 30th, 1798. The premiere was thrilling. As Haydn later recounted, one moment I was as cold as ice, the next I seemed on fire. More than once I was afraid I should have a stroke. It soon became the second most frequently performed oratorio after Handel's Messiah, and in 1800 it was published in both English and German. Haydn reportedly preferred that the creation be performed in English in English-speaking countries. The fact that the creation was composed in English and German is very unusual, and von Sweden clarifies that he didn't just translate the English into German, he worked on them both at the same time, which would have been fine, except that his knowledge of German was much better than his knowledge of English. This means that the English version is often changed, sometimes quite a bit, to be poetic, to match the German, to fit with Haydn's music, and occasionally just to make sense. For these performances, Music of the Baroque will be using an edition of The Creation made by the publisher Breitkopf and Härtel, featuring an English translation done in 1925 by Miffon V. Roberts, who took quite a few liberties with Van Sweeten's original. In some cases, the words you hear in the following musical examples may differ from what you'll hear in the performance. Like Handel's Messiah, the creation is organized into three parts. The first and second parts depict the process of the world's creation, introducing the first 6 days with a recitative, or speech-like song, based on text from the Bible, highlighting picturesque moments with arias or arioso, which is particularly sung speech, settings of Milton's words, and then punctuating the day's end with a triumphant chorus. In the third part, the seventh day, Adam and Eve contemplate their miraculous existence and the wonders of the garden in lyrical and descriptive verse. The last time we performed the creation in 2014, I sat down with Jane Glover to hear her thoughts on the work.
If you ask me, what are the 5 great pieces ever written? The creation would come certainly in the top 5, if not the top 1. I think it is one of the greatest pieces ever written by anybody for anything. And the fact that Haydn decided, having heard Messiah, I could write a big oratorio too, but Handel has taken the subject of Messiah, so what else could I do? Oh, I know, how about the creation? That's a small subject. And with the help of his wonderful librettist, Baron von Sweden, who prepared the text for him about how the world came to be, he set out to write this extraordinary work of the progress from chaos into human contact and human behaviour via everything in between. And as one would expect with Haydn, it has everything. It has narrative and therefore drama. It has brilliant description and colour and orchestration. And I think what I love about it most of all is that he clearly believed every word of it. That he was a creationist, as everybody was in those days, and that he really believed that God said, now we're going to have light, and now we're going to have the sea, and now we're going to have fish. And he just attacked that whole process of putting that into music with such relish and such passion and such sincerity. And so we begin with, I think, one of the most extraordinary passages in any oratorio, the representation of chaos. I think this possibly relates back to his string quartet evenings with Mozart 15 or 20 years earlier, because it was Mozart who wrote a slow introduction to a C major quartet in which he pulled the tonality apart with such distinction and heart-rending sort of emotion, and then pulled it back together again, and did it again and again and again, and then just exploded into something glorious, the C major. And that quartet is now called the Dissonance Quartet. I think that sowed a seed in Haydn's mind, and a decade and a half later, he represents chaos on a much bigger scale, not just four string players, but a whole orchestra where you actually sometimes don't even know where the first beat of the bar is, let alone what key you're in. It is an extraordinary, almost surreal musical experience, and as a conductor I would say that this is quite the hardest part of creation to do. But having established this chaos, and then the voice comes to say that in the beginning God created, etc., etc. And then we move towards let there be light, and there was light, and that great, huge C major chord, which should certainly wake up those who've been nodding through chaos.
The fifth and sixth days are the subject of part 2. The creation of living creatures provides Haydn with an even more fantastic opportunity for inventive and humorous word painting. The orchestra brings to life the tawny lion, agile tiger, and nimble stag in Raphael's accompanied recitative, straight opening her fertile womb.
And God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beasts of the earth after their kind. Straight opening her fertile womb, the earth obeyed the word and teemed creatures numberless, in perfect forms and fully grown. Cheerful roaring stands the tawny lion. In sudden leaps the flexible tiger appears.
The third and final part of the oratorio focuses on the day of rest, allowing Adam and Eve to take center stage. In solos, duets, and choruses, they revel in the paradise before them and in their love for each other. As Jane Glover notes, we don't see the fall, but Haydn does suggest it. In their slow, elegant final love duet, the pair suddenly shift in tone at the words, "The dew-spangled morning, oh, how it quickens all." The faster tempo, duple meter, and rustic horns signal an écossaise, a dance that was popular in Vienna at the turn of the 19th century. The sudden intrusion of this contemporary secular element probably would have been understood right away as a fleeting reference to the pair's imminent fall from grace. You're about to hear Emma Kirkby and Anthony Rolfe Johnson in a performance with the Academy of Ancient Music and Christopher Hogwood from 1990.
She quickens all.
Coolness of Eden, oh, how she always talks.
Thank you so much for joining me for the first Baroque Notes of our 54th season. And I'll give the last words to Jane Glover again from our 2014 conversation.
It's an enormous piece. It's one of the most fulfilling pieces to sing, to play, and to conduct, and I think also